we have this book that I found. And all the research I did, there's a lot of books written about the prophecy of the popes that the general public is not aware of. Now, the thing is, most of these are by Catholic scholars, and most of them are European, so they're not in English, okay? There's a lot of books in Italian. There's books in French. And this one that I found, The Mysterious Prophecy of the Popes, by René Thébault, it's all written in French. He's a Belgian Jesuit, and he works at a university, and he really believed the prophecy of the popes. Okay, he believed it deeply, but he believed the original underlying level of context. So what we think we have an ancient prophecy. Maybe it was written by Malachi, maybe it wasn't. Nobody can really know for sure about that because we just don't have any evidence going all the way back to Malachi other than kind of the legendary story. But what we do have is we have this document. Now, we can detect that there were alterations made prior to 1570. The way we can detect that is that there was a famous book by Panvinius, who was a scholar who wrote a papal history about all the popes. Now, he made some errors. He made some mistakes in his book. Now, this was like the source material for the papacy during that time, during the 16th century. Now, what we see in the Malachi prophecy is that in the prophecies up to 1590, somebody went and wrote an interpretation next to the Latin phrase. Now, they wrote who the Pope was, how it was fulfilled, and what the fulfillment was. Now, what they did, it's a dead giveaway, is that they made some of the same mistakes as Panvinius's book. Now, this kind of shows us that somebody manipulated the prophecy to make it fit that book. Now, why would they do that? They were trying to make it really obvious so that any cardinal that tried to investigate the prophecy for himself would be able to look at this source material and then look at the reference book that he would have available, which would be Panvinius's book, and he would find an exact match. So it looks like someone manipulated the text prior to 1570 to do that as an effort for propaganda, and we think that they were trying to get a certain pope elected. Okay, but after that date, then there's no reason that anyone would ever alter it because it was way into the future. So we can really believe that we have this underlying authentic text that goes from that date forward. So René Thébault really presents a lot of good arguments for why 1570 is the cutoff point. Now, if you go to Wikipedia or read John Hogue or any of the more modern people, they're going to say that it was 1595 because that's when we had the first copy in hand that was published by Arnold D. Wyan. But so 1570 is where we start the original text, and that's the date that I'm going with because the arguments for that are pretty strong. Now, what Thébault did is he figured out average papal reign up to his time in 1951 when he published this book, and it was 11 years. And what he did, all you have to do to prove that to yourself is you just take how many days the Pope was in office and divide it by the number of popes, and you get the average papal reign. Now, from 1570 to the last Pope, the 112th, you have a certain number, and so you have a calculation, and if you put 11 years for each one, where do you land? Well, René Thébault calculated it in 1951 and landed on 2012. Okay, and all the things that Tom said about 2012. You have all these weird prophecies. You have the Mayans. All the New Agers are talking about 2012. I've been skeptical about 2012 myself in the past because it just seems like all these pagans and New Agers and all this kind of stuff. I didn't really want to buy into it. But there's some reason why all these people are coming on the same thing. And then we get into this research, and it's the last thing I expected. I find
that Chris, while we're waiting on Steve to get back on the line.
I believe we have Steve. You back with it? Okay.
Yep, I'm back.
Yes.
Well, while we were waiting on Steve, and thank God you're back, Steve. Man, the ship needs a captain. But we were talking about this book by René Thébault. He's a Belgian priest. His book is a meticulous analysis of the prophecy of the popes. In our book, we provide as much of his background as can be known, the fact that he was Belgian-born, when he was born, the fact that he was a Jesuit in the order in something like 1901. Later on, he was an instructor at the faculty of the University de Namur, which is founded by the Jesuit order in 1831, and so on. But this was a guy, he was an academic. He published books on theology, biblical studies in French, and several, the meaning of Christ's words was one he published, the meaning of the God-man was one. But what we look at is a book that he published. It was a codex. He was a code breaker. And he published this work just before he died. The book was published in 1951, and he died at 69 in Egenhoven, Belgium in 1952. So he died right after it was published. But what he did, and what Chris found, was that this Jesuit adopted the methodology of a Catholic mystic, as well as being a scholar and a mathematician and a code breaker. And his book makes this compelling case that the prophecy of the popes is a real prophecy, regardless from what source it was inspired, demonically or divinely. And he approaches his study from this real complex, what Chris said, mathematical, cryptographical, anagrammatical, even solar activity, to show from numerous improvable possibilities that something very strange, call it supernatural if you like, something very strange was involved in the prophecy of the popes. And it either is supernaturally inspired, or people inside the Vatican believe it was, and therefore have been electing popes for hundreds of years that they feel would fulfill this prophecy of the popes. And what might that indicate, therefore, for the upcoming conclave that's going to happen at any moment, according to news sources, to elect the successor to Pope Pope Benedict XVI, which on the list is Petrus Romanus, who gives rise to the Antichrist and end times prophecy. So if insiders at the Vatican believe it, if they've been selecting popes that they think can fulfill that prophecy, then what are they committed to? And if that's not the case, then the prophecy itself is very mysterious in that it has been very accurate. And what I want to tell people is I'm not just an author, and I'm also a best-selling author, but I'm a publisher. And I got to tell you, the miniature masterpiece in our new book, Petrus Romanus, The Final Pope is Here, that was written by Chris Putnam, that chapter that deals exclusively with the work by René Thibault, it's fresh, it's investigative, it's scholarly, it's well-researched, it's never been published anywhere before, and I guarantee you it's going to stun some readers, the media. It's a game changer for mythologists and other prophecy writers who are going to be taken really offside by it. The 2012 community is old news compared to what Chris has discovered. Yes?
I think we need to bring in David Flynn's work, Temple at the Center of Time, too, because one of the things that is really prevalent, especially in the rocks falling out of the sky or whatever, missiles, call it what you will, is obviously Dave Flynn was given the Newton interpretation of the code that Sir Isaac Newton knew existed but was not given the time to do it. And I thought it was interesting. I talked to Mark, David's twin brother, the other day, and I said, it's interesting to me, Mark, that David was taken home to be with Jesus. He went to heaven, he died. But to me, he's as alive now as he was the last time I sat with him in his apartment or in my office, and we shared the most amazing stuff. But here's what I want to say. It is conceivable, you guys, that obviously, you've heard it, I've heard it, that the Catholic Church behind the scenes is wrangling for control of Jerusalem, okay? You know that, Tom. You've even alluded to that in some of your writings. And, Chris, I don't know how you feel about that.
Oh, Chris has written his second
it.
masterpiece in our new book is on that subject.
Okay, so I think we need to go there, you guys. Here's the thing, and I don't mean – we've got people that are trying to get to the bottom line. And, you know, Tom, my nickname is Bottom Line, okay? And while you're a researcher, I'm a researcher, Chris is a scholar. The point is let's bring it now up to the next step, because even one of the guys that was emailing, listening to us tonight, he said, isn't it interesting that the temple, or that's the place of where everything was, directed at Jesus to fall down. First of all, the temple in Jerusalem was God's presence. But the other thing is, it proves a better point, ladies and gentlemen, people still look to a building instead of the Savior. That's my 2 cents worth. So, Chris, would you deal with that about how this thing could work out and play? Because I think we need to bring this right into the reign of Antichrist. The false prophet gives us power into the beast, all that stuff that's going on. And basically, we're talking about Lucifer's end-time play for control of the world. So, and Tom, I don't mean to take away from Petrus Romanus, but I think it's really critical that we deal with that because, again, all of the excitement and the turning every single leaf over doesn't help the people that are still trying to follow us and really probably don't care about some of the most exciting things. They just want to know the bottom line. So what I'm trying to do is give you guys 8 hours worth of the radio time to get just to the bottom line, okay?
Well, Steve, before I moved to Jerusalem, we were talking about. Am I still on? Hello?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you are.
The sound went out. Okay. I want to go ahead and publish this thing to my site so people can go and verify this thing with the 11-year reign. I'm going to go ahead and hit publish right now at Logos Apologia. Okay, that should be live on the internet in just a minute. Now, what this will show you is that the calculation with 11 years per pope extrapolated up to now works out perfectly, and in fact, it supports that it could happen in the next 2 or 3 months. Now, we can talk about it more later if you guys want to look at it, but what you're saying.
I want to leave that, if you don't mind, Chris. Not because it's not cool and not because it's so amazing, but we've got to bring everybody up to, Petrus Romanus will be out in 6 weeks, and everybody can, or so. That's what I think you said, Tom. But the point is, everyone can read what you're posting daily or every other day on Raiders or on. And by the way, Tom, just so you know, I'm linking to those as you write them. But the point is that I think it's critical because look. We've got the Middle East war brewing. We've got the situation with all the Catholic intrigue. And then how do you both figure? Here's a question that I want to hear from both of you. Tom, you and I did a show on the alien disclosure, okay? And I'm not trying to take away and get into UFO or take away from Petrus Romanus, but it's got to be obvious to everybody that a man in the position who's going to assume the final pope, the Black Pope's role, is more than a adept at all this stuff.
Well, that's absolutely right, and I want Chris to talk about here's the thing, Steve. The work by Rene Thibault is directly connected to what David Flynn wrote about. It's directly connected to what's happening in the Middle East. The bottom line is all of this prophecy is bits and pieces, parts to a puzzle that provide a much bigger picture that says to the Christian community, you better wake up because you are right now entering into a period of time that has been prophesied for thousands of years to unfold. This is part of the reason why both Chris and I, at times during the work on this research, stopped dead in our tracks and almost didn't publish this work because, frankly, it was that unnerving. And I'd love to talk in a moment about David Flynn's work and plans that you and I have, but I don't want to take away from Chris answering the question about what this has to do with the Vatican's designs on Jerusalem and the next temple.
Right, and Chris, if you would too, answer that question and then answer your take, and if you don't have one you want to defer to, and I mean, I don't know because none of this is rehearsed, ladies and gentlemen, defer to Tom on it. I think the two critical points are the Vatican's move to Jerusalem and the alien connection, because obviously I believe that the presence of fallen angels, and I can share true stories about that from eyewitnesses at these ceremonies under the catacombs in the Vatican and under, if you will, the holy city. It's far from being holy. The point that I'm trying to make is that we've got to bring people up to speed, and then Tom will go to the temple at the center of time because that's critical too. So please, Chris, go ahead with the first, if you would.
Well, certainly. Steve, it's interesting that you went there because I mean that when after kind of establishing that I believe there was something to the prophecy, the first place that I went was to the Jerusalem issue, and one of the first documents that I found that's something that is going to be revealed probably for the first time for a lot of people in this book is that the site Al Jazeera found a whole bunch of classified U.S. State Department documents that from WikiLeaks and other places, and they put them up on the internet. And I went and dug through a whole cache of documents there. And I have a conversation that happened in the U.S. State Department between Condoleezza Rice and some representatives from the Palestinians, where they're actually talking about turning over the holy city of Jerusalem to quote unquote religious authorities, non-government people. Okay. Now, where that coincides with a lot of research coming out of Israel is like people like Barry Kamish, and I went and bought like 3 of his books. He's been on this story for the last 15 years or so, where Simon Peres, who's now the president of Israel, promised the old holy city of Jerusalem to the Vatican. This has been going on for quite a while. This conspiracy has been going on that they think that there's going to be some kind of peace deal between the Palestinians and Israel, and they're going to make Jerusalem an international city that's not really the capital of Israel anymore. It's going to be international. It's going to have a Palestinian representative, and it's going to have a Jewish representative, but they're actually talking about putting the Pope in charge of Jerusalem. And right as we were finishing up the research for the book, there's been a whole slew of articles coming out of Jerusalem where they're giving up the sovereignty of some of the holy sites to the Vatican right now. Just in the last couple weeks, there's a monastery that has supposedly David's grave, and also the Hall of the Last Supper is there. Now, the last articles that I read, it seems to be that they have actually given sovereignty over that landmark to the Vatican already. So it's not if it's going to happen; it's already happening now, as far as I know. And where this is going, I think it's leading to the Third Temple.
Yep.
I really do. And when you start looking at the prophecies in 2 Thessalonians about the Antichrist sitting in the temple declaring himself God, I think that is speaking to a real temple in Jerusalem, and not an allegorical temple. And I think that we're seeing the pieces of that falling into place right now. Don't you think so, Tom?
Well, I think it's almost impossible to, even in a 4-hour interview, to be able to detail for all of the listeners all of the ways in which we are right now seeing a waterfall of biblical fulfillment. I don't want to be crude, but a person would have to be an idiot not to understand that we have entered into a very portentous moment in time. It's stuff that David Flynn wrote about. And Steve, because you know how I am, I launch, I start talking, and then I can't shut up. Why don't we let people know what you and I are planning to do with David Flynn's research?
Why don't you go ahead, Tom, because obviously you'll be the publisher of it, and go ahead. Because I think it's important that people understand that he laid the foundation that other men will build on. Again, I'm so sad that the Lord took him, but I almost feel like it was a time thing too. I think that David would have probably, and I believe this is true, he was onto so much that for the time it wasn't given for us to know at that specific point. I'm talking in the last several weeks since his passing. And so go ahead and share what we're going to do, because I think it's critical that people understand this.
Well, and also, Steve, you said a moment ago that the 2 top things you want to discuss is the Vatican's design on Jerusalem, which Chris has spent a great deal of time researching in a very scholarly way for this upcoming book. And you said, secondly, the connection between the Vatican and alienology, for want of a better word. But there is a third, and in my opinion, this is probably the most prescient. This is probably the most important issue, having to do with Petrus Romanus and who is going to be elected as the Pope to succeed Pope Benedict XVI. And that has to do with a cover-up of the Fatima visions, what Malachi Martin was trying to make the world aware of, what I think we could make the world aware of, and it's very much why we're doing this radio show. And so I'm hoping, I realize we got a couple more hours, but that last hour is for people to send in questions. So I hope we get a moment to go back and visit that issue, because it will explain a lot for people what is going on in Rome right now and why they're seeing this current backstabbing event where these various power brokers are turning on each other inside the Vatican. And it's very much germane to this discussion. Now, having said that, though, and I was hoping we would get time tonight to say something about David Flynn. Flynn was a very dear friend to me. He was a very dear friend to you. David Flynn is probably one of the most plagiarized guys in history.
Absolutely.
His website was ahead of everybody. The Watcher's website, the stuff he was writing out there, there's got to be several dozen books by even best-selling authors out there right now who ripped off his material and never gave him credit. It sounds like the world of Christian expression through written literature to me, Tom.
Yeah. I mean, it always happens, and so we're setting the record straight, so continue. I'm sorry. Yeah. I just feel strong about
And by the way, you mentioned the book that I published, Temple at the Center of Time, and that book, David was not able to do media when it first came out. I got him on Coast to Coast, and immediately afterward he went off grid, as you know, for reasons we won't explain. But for his own personal reasons, he wasn't available to do media. But that book still, that first year, became a best-selling book. And David had come to me several years ago talking about how he thought he found something, and he did. And if anybody reads Temple at the Center of Time, they'll get it. It was unprecedented. As always, it was groundbreaking. It was brand new. It was David Flynn, right? He was going to be speaking at a conference, and he was worried. I won't mention who he was speaking at a conference with, but he was worried because they wanted the information, and he was afraid that once again they were going to steal it and put it in their book and not give him credit. And I said, well, David, then why don't you just let me publish it? I'll put your name on it. You get credit for it. You get paid royalties, and so we did. You did the same thing with his groundbreaking book on Cydonia, the Monuments of Mars. Now, what we want people to know is that if they don't know it already, David Flynn passed away a few months ago. He had a brain tumor. He did the whole surgery and radiation and whatever therapies they recommended for it, but it got the best of him, and God is always in control, and David Flynn tonight is in a better place visiting with,
probably with Daniel. They're saying, Daniel, here it is, my brother.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding, by the way. I really
right.
believe that.
Yeah. He's probably explaining some things to Daniel, sure. But what we want people to know is you published his book, Cydonia. I published his book, Temple at the Center of Time. He also wrote some articles. He did all these amazing video presentations where he was ahead of the curve. And we decided, ladies and gentlemen, that myself and Steve Quayle, we're going to publish a new book called, and this is just a working title. I don't know what the final title is going to be, but it's going to be called something like The Complete Works of David Flynn. And for all those people out there that have been trying to get a copy of Cydonia, and you see that thing over there on eBay or whatever selling for $1,000, it's going to have that book. It's going to have Temple at the Center of Time. It's going to have articles that were published by David Flynn. Some of those articles where David Flynn was the guy, by the way, that came up with and it's still in a 2005 Raiders News Update article. He was the one who came up with the connection between Roswell, the UFO crash site, Mount Hermon, and the year 2012 and how all of that aligns geographically, which has been ripped off by an awful lot of other people who have published it in their works as if they were the originator of it. But David Flynn published the original article. In fact, the year that he wrote that for Raiders News Update, I got it published in UFO magazine and several other magazines, and people were just amazed that nobody before David Flynn had seen this. But that's the way David Flynn was. It was, in fact, you know, I want to tell you something, Steve. I had often said in private conversations to my wife, Nita, I said, you know, David, he sees the world in a way that nobody else does. And it kind of reminded me of that movie, I can't remember the actor's name, but that movie where the guy had a brain tumor. And he was able to see into other dimensions because the tumor was putting pressure on a particular part of the brain that then allowed him to be able to see things other people couldn't see. And what's strange is I had always said to my wife privately, I said, there's something very strange about David. He sees what nobody else sees. And when he publishes it, it's always way beyond what the rest of us can imagine. And yet he's so humble that he doesn't make an issue about people stealing his work and reporting it to be their own. He just does what he does. And then when we found out that David had a tumor on his brain, I told my wife, I said, I told you, I've always thought that there's something, somehow, God made this marvelous human, and there is somehow, some way, something that is allowing a particular part of his brain to see the world in terms of measurements and mathematics and whatever that the rest of us can't imagine. Well, that was God's gift to us, was David Flynn and his wonderful work. And Steve Quayle and I are going to publish a book. It's going to be out fairly soon, within a couple of months or so, called The Complete Works of David Flynn. It's going to have all the books he wrote. It's going to have articles he wrote. And then we're going to provide free to you, if we can get access to them, free to you, his presentations at Roswell, other places where he appeared with Richard Hoagland, and other places. Anything we can get our hands on, then we're going to make that available to you too.
So we want something too, Tom. I think people need to understand this. I've been on talk radio for 20 years. I've interviewed the smartest men, but I will say this, and when I say something, you've basically defined it. His ability to think, see, and draw conclusions. By the way, David has a twin brother, and I want everybody to pray for him. His name is Mark. This is really hard. When twins lose, and they were identical twins, or forgive me, are identical twins, Mark is brilliant. I'm not saying that to flatter him, but I know this. I know that Mark has a work to do. Mark's probably the only guy, and I'm saying this, I can't understand David. I think he would be so gracious to me and walk me through it and stuff. But I'm just telling you, we need to pray for Mark. That's David Flynn's brother, because he is going to carry on. I said, my friend, the one shoe, the right shoe, is now gone. Now you have to take up the left shoe. No, difference in the shoes, but the point is, and he knows it. So there's only one person I know, and I've met them both, and I want to say this: Mark is the co-equivalent genius of his brother. I'm just telling you,
that's wonderful.
Point blank.
And Mark I think he has agreed, has he not? He's
yes.
going to write an introduction to this work.
Yep.
Mark has been sending us pictures. I asked Mark, and you asked Mark, to give us all kinds of pictures of David Flynn. I'm hoping to even get pictures of when he was a youth. So people know this. The book will be published. It'll have Temple at the Center of Time in it. In the middle of the book, it'll have an area where there's going to be many pages of images, pictures of David with captions. This also going to have the book Sidonia, and then it's going to have these other works that David wrote that we're going to publish and make sure he gets credit for.
Absolutely.
Now, people need to know this. We continue to pay royalties on this work to David's successors. Steve Quayle and I, ladies and gentlemen, are also going to make sure that a portion, a substantial portion of the sale of every book goes to supporting David Flynn's children. We're talking about other things we haven't yet worked out the details on, but we're talking about setting up a memorial fund. And we want to do this in tandem with the family's wishes. For instance, if providing revenue from the sale of this book to his children is the family's wishes, then we're going to do that. If the family tells us they want it to go to brain cancer research, we're going to do that, whatever it is. But we're going to make you aware of what we're doing and let you know that you will finally be able to get your hands on copies of his research that you've been emailing me by the thousands of people about, emailing Steve by the thousands of people about, wanting to know where in the world you can get this stuff without having to pay $1,000 for a book at eBay. We're going to make it all available to you, very affordable. But in addition to that, part of why we're selling the book itself, other than the fact we have to keep from going bankrupt, is we want to establish a memorial fund in David's memory. And we want revenue to be able to flow into all of the above, helping his kids, supporting brain research. And so we'll be making you, Steve Quayle at stevequayle.com, Tom Horn at RaidersNewsUpdate.com. In the weeks following, you will see advertising for this. And we're going to make you available of how you can get your hands on that research you've been asking for, but also know that when you buy those books, there's a very substantial portion of that that's going to be going to these charitable funds in David Flynn's memory. And so we think this is a very inspired idea, and we're happy to do it.
Well, Tom, again, let's now go into the Vatican. How do you see the Black Pope, Petrus Romanus, final Pope? How do you see him fitting in with the alien thing? I mean, I have my take. I don't have the scholarship to back it up. It's just the, if you will, how it's been playing out. Most people don't understand. Here, and ladies and gentlemen, those of you who are Catholics, those of you who are Protestants, you want to know who the Luciferians are? The ones that are changing the classic basis and foundation of faith to include aliens, and who are claiming that the Word of God is not the inspired Word of God. In other words, when you see that, and you see those statements coming out of cardinals and whoever else, you know, is out there, you're going to be able to have discernment. So those of you who are the Catholic brethren, you need to pray for discernment, because there's going to be and this is prophecy, and this is a thus saith the Lord, the battle that is coming into the Catholic Church is unparalleled. And I'm not talking verbal, I'm not talking, it's going to be a battle, and I'm talking a battle unto death, because the thing, Tom, is that this whole alien thing is being slipped in, and obviously the Luciferians can't wait for, let's just say this, Lucifer's Siamese twin to come on the scene. And so I think it's really important that people get this message. So please, would you cover that? It's really critical.
All right, let me do something as fast as I possibly can. First of all, tie this into what's happening in Rome right now, and then tie it into the whole alien agenda. And of course, if Chris has things that he wants to add, just you got to remember that when me and Steve get on a roll, you basically have to just jump in, thump us in the head, and say, "I have something to say." So, first of all, in research to determine who among the cardinals is most papable, which of the contenders in Rome right now is most likely to take the throne of St. Peter, so-called, following Pope Benedict XVI, nothing becomes more intriguing than how at the center of all of that is a cover-up involving the third secret of Fatima. This is found in the most likely candidates, I believe, in Petrus Romanus. And I want to make this point as quickly as I can, and then I'm going to move to the alien side. Can I do it that way, Steve?
Yep.
Okay. So first of all, Peter the Roman. Who is that going to be? Well, you have some Catholic prophets telling us it's going to be Cardinal Arends. That's Ronald L. Conti Jr. You have some who's telling us it's going to be Peter Turkson, the African cardinal. And if you had asked me just 60 days ago, I would have said, without doubt, that Peter the Roman is going to be Cardinal Tarcisio Peter Bertone. He was born in Romano, which means the Roman. His second name is Peter. He was born in Canterbury. He's Peter the Roman. And among other things, Cardinal Bertone is, at the time that our book is heading to the typesetter, it's with the typesetter right now, he's second in command at the Vatican. And he's the Secretary of State. The Pope's Carmelingo also, which is Italian for Chamberlain, which means that he will be responsible during a papal vacancy to serve as the acting head of state of the Vatican City until the time of agreement, the election of a new pope. And part of our investigation into Bertone includes background into a 2007 book that he wrote called The Last Seer of Fatima. And the reason why this is important is because it appears to have accomplished exactly the opposite of its primary objective, and that is mainly to refute another work by a famous Italian media personality, a journalist, an author by the name of Antonio Socchi, whose manuscript, The Fourth Secret of Fatima, claims that Rome, the Holy See, the Vatican, has been suppressing information concerning the true secret that was allegedly delivered to those, kids there in Fatima in 1917. I want people to maybe go to Google and Google this for themselves. I apologize, I'm being interrupted here. In his uncharacteristically explosive response to Cardinal Bertone, people can Google this title, Dear Cardinal Bertone, who, between you and me, is deliberately lying? And they will discover how, after significant time and investigation, this Mr. Socchi concluded that the Vatican had withheld an important part of the Fatima revelation during its celebrated press conference in 2000, the release of the message of Fatima. Now, what does that have to do with anything? Well, Socchi describes in the introduction to his book how he used to believe, like most Catholics probably still do, that the Vatican's official version of the Fatima message had been released in 2000. I apologize. I'm getting totally interrupted here. The vision of Fatima was reportedly released in the year 2000. At that time, it had been prepared by who? Cardinal Ratzinger, who is now the current Pope Benedict XVI, and Monsignor Tarcisio Bertone. I have no idea what I'm listening to.
We're getting a little bit of background probably from one of people on Skype. We'll just make sure we've got everybody here. Chris?
I'm here.
On Skype. Steve, are you back?
Yeah, I'm back on Skype.
Okay, we got Steve reestablished. It's just extra sensitive. I can hear you type on the keyboard. You're coming through loud and clear, Tom. Keep going.
Okay. In any case, the release to the public claimed to be the final secret in the year 2000. The investigator from Italy, from Rome, Socchi, he had come across an article by an Italian journalist by the name of Vittore Missori and some other stuff. What their work had caused him to do was to begin to question whether or not, in fact, Rome had released the final secret of Fatima. And what he did was he started a investigative research. Now, keep in mind, this is one of the most renowned media personalities in Rome. He's a Catholic. But he began a probe focusing on the biggest question of them all, and that was a portion of Lucy, the last living young person from Fatima who had received these revelations, had a portion of her document which contained the principal words of the so-called Blessed Virgin Mother concerning end-time conditions at Rome, and even perhaps the coming of Petrus Romanus, was that being withheld from public view by the Vatican due to its potentially explosive content. And what happened was Soki's suspicions deepened after he started, requesting interviews with Cardinal Bertone, who had been an acquaintance of his in the past. In fact, Bertone had invited him to speak at various conferences before he had his position as Secretary of State. But now, all of a sudden, Bertone wouldn't answer his inquiries. And what happened was, over a period of time, bottom line is, Soki was left convinced that there are two sets of the Fatima secret. One that the public has seen, which was published in 2000, but another, which for reasons as yet at least mostly unknown, the Vatican is keeping buried. And at the beginning of that plot was a description of the third secret that was given by Cardinal Angelo Sodano, who is now the power, if you will, in Rome, whose supporters are putting out these poison pen letters to try to undergird, or try to, whatever the word is.
Undermine,
the position of Cardinal Bertone and his possibility of becoming Petrus Romanus. And what Sodano had done in 2000, he gave a speech during the June 2000 message of Fatima. There was a whole, 2 weeks of events going on in Fatima. Pope John Paul II spoke there, but Sodano gave a speech. And if you've read the Vision of Fatima, there's a portion of it that talks about a bishop that's clothed in white. And he's walking through a city, Steve, that is almost entirely destroyed. He's climbing over the bodies of dead religious people. There's evidently been, according to this vision, a large number of people in St. Peter's Square for some reason. It sounds actually like a conclave, and he's climbing over their dead bodies. They're all dead. Bishops are dead. Religious people are all dead. And he's trying to get to a large cross. This might be the cross that's on the top of the obelisk there in the middle of St. Peter's Square, which we could also talk about what that all means. But he kneels down, and then terrorists come out and they shoot him and they kill him. That's what the prophecy of Fatima is talking about. And yet in 2000, Sodano joined other conspirators in which he gave this sermon, and he said the bishop that's clothed in white is only apparently dead when he falls to the ground under a burst of gunfire. And then he went on to preach a sermon in which he said that the assassination attempt against John Paul II was the fulfillment of that prophecy. Well, a lot of people, including, by the way, a lot of Catholics, including Catholic experts, saw that date, him, the presentation, all of it as a concerted cover-up. As of course, the published parts of the Fatima prophecy didn't bear any significance to the 1981 assassination attempt against John Paul II. It didn't match at all. The bishop clothed in white part of the Fatima prophecy talks about him dying amidst corpses, martyrs falling to the ground in a city half destroyed in a burst of gunfire. But John Paul's assassination attempt, it didn't include soldiers. They weren't firing bullets. There was one guy. Nobody else was killed. It just didn't match the prophecy at all. The city wasn't half in ruins. So a lot of Catholic prophets believe that this is a future event that is tied to the election of the Pope that is following Pope Benedict XVI, that something could happen at that event. And in fact, Catholic prophet Ronald L. Conti Jr. believes that in the very next, and we're going to see if he knows what he's talking about, that in the very next papal conclave, there is going to be a terrorist event inside Rome. It's going to destroy the city of Rome in fulfillment of all these ancient prophecies, but also Benedict XVI is going to be assassinated, and there is going to be a pope who is going to take his place, who should not have been elected to take that place. And now, in fulfillment of Cardinal Manning and all these other ancient prophets, you're going to have a pope who is going to take the seat of the most powerful religious institution in the world, basically, who is an anti-pope. He is a fake pope. He is under the influence of Satan, and he is going to help give rise to the Antichrist. That is very much connected to what happened in the year 2000. Now, concerned Catholics have been contrasting the 1984 testimony of Cardinal Ratzinger, who is the current Pope Benedict XVI, because at the year 2000 event, Cardinal Ratzinger went along with this whole Sedano depiction of the Fatima prophecies being fulfilled in the assassination attempt against Pope John Paul II. But in his in earlier years, Cardinal Ratzinger had said that the Fatima prophecy spoke of end time events, spoke of a departure from the faith, spoke of a great apostasy beginning all the way from the hierarchy of Rome downward. And they're wanting to know why what he said earlier didn't correspond to what he said in the year 2000. And by the way, Cardinal Ratzinger, we verify this in our book, he gave a confession in which he said his hand was forced at the 2000 Fatima disclosure. Well, who could have forced his hand? Who could have forced his hand to say something, that wasn't true? So I don't know how much time we have. To me, what is happening, what is going to happen, is central to the discussion I'm having right now. And I'd love to go into those details, because those are the details that really tell us what's going on in Rome right now. But
we have 1 hour and 18 minutes left on the clock, gentlemen.
Okay. But Tom, I don't want to do that. Yeah. If Steve wants to talk about the alien aspect of it, we can go there too. But to me, this...
Yep. Let me just tell you what I want to get you to, because I think it's critical. I think it affects everyone. The fact that Rome, in the last 6 months, a lot of intel in the back channels from the backside has been indicating that there are specific terrorist teams assigned to Rome to take down the Vatican. I even believe, I don't know if it was one of the mullahs, and forgive me, I can't put my hand on it right now, but they're talking about that. So listen, if obviously the Luciferians want this great war between Christians, Muslims, and Jews, which they're going to get, then the symbol of Christianity, at least, a major part of Christianity, the Vatican, must be destroyed. And the fact is that the plan, let me share this, you guys. I was in a very wealthy man's home. This is 1 minute to put this into perspective. I've told my radio audience this a number of years ago. This must have been 5 or 7 years ago. One of the richest men in Hollywood. How I was there, I won't explain. I was invited by somebody who was invited. He sure didn't invite me. And I saw on his desk the new temple. The temple is not what you think it is. And I asked the Lord, I said, Lord, what am I seeing here? And he said, that's the temple of the Antichrist. And it was amazing. I mean, trust me when I tell you, Rich, I mean, this guy's not in the millions, he's in the billions, and he's definitely one of the most, I would say, most powerful illuminists. Also, the person that was linked to this guy, he had a very strange affinity for young women, I mean young, and spying on them and sexually exploiting them. That's another story. But what I'm saying to you is this, is the plans are already in place. This is all orchestrated. It's going by the book of Revelation, the book of Daniel. It's going as the prophet said it would go. And so, Tom, I think it's critical that obviously the Luciferians are working overtime, and we can't even go there. I wish we could do 24 hours. The bottom line is the stargates are opening. Even the clouds, the National Oceanographic Administration saying something's happening. the clouds, the normal clouds that used to be at a specific height, are lowering and they're dissipating. That's true. Whatever God made is being taken away. The chemtrails are terraforming the earth, but that's another story. How do the aliens fit in? Just do a 5-minute, 10-minute just thing, because I don't think people understand that when the Vatican made its, you're going to love the word, quantum shift to now embrace what they usually teach are demons. And by the way, I was in contact with one of the most prominent sorcerers, an elderly gentleman for the Vatican, so I know from his position what he sees taking place. But so this is a quantum change. Chris dealt with Jerusalem being a critical part of the move, but also how do the aliens fit in? And I'm not trying to take away from Petrus Romanus, but my guess is that they're kissing cousins, okay?
Okay, well, I'll go there then. I just want people to know that when they read the book Petrus Romanus, it's not going to be about aliens.
No, I understand that. I understand that, and I'm not trying to take away from it. When we go to the questions, we'll go specifically to that. But I think, look, we only got 15 minutes before we go to the questions, okay? And okay. I'm getting emails asking me to ask you that, because there are people that have listened to you, are now being, introduced to Chris, but have listened to me, and they're saying, okay, I'm starting to get it now. So if you just want to take 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking.
All right, I'll do that.
Yeah.
Okay, and so let me just jump really far forward and just say this. The rabbit hole goes very deep, right?
Yep.
And I will do published work on this probably this year, in which I'm going to show the world interdisciplinary works from the Vatican, in which they are explaining how mankind could soon be evangelized, that's their word, during contact with spiritual aliens. I know that sounds extraordinary. If people want to email me, I'm glad to send them the actual publications from some of the highest placed astronomers inside the Vatican, in which they are talking about us soon being greeted by extraterrestrial civilizations, and how we will need to respect those intelligences who are going to have, according to these documents from the Vatican, they're going to have, let's say, a higher level of understanding of God. And the reason is because they're not fallen, according to this theology. We're fallen. They're not. They're closer to God than we are. And therefore, they're going to have a non-terrestrial intelligence that offers better understanding of the relationship between God and the whole of creation. And by the way, let me just quote this document from the Vatican. This quote, this would not immediately oblige the Christian to renounce his own faith in God simply on the basis of the reception of new, unexpected information of a religious character from extraterrestrial civilizations, but such a renunciation could come soon after as the new religious content originating from outside the earth is confirmed as reasonable and credible. Once the trustworthiness of the information has been verified, let me stop for a moment in this quote and ask if anybody can explain to me how it could be verified. How would you verify an extraterrestrial message? This really kind of sets me aside. Anyway, the believer would have to reconcile such new information with the truth that he or she already knows and believes on the basis of the revelation of the one and triune God, conducting a rereading of the gospel inclusive of the new data, end quote. So how this information is going to be confirmed as reliable is beyond me. How this more complete ET gospel is going to de-emphasize or significantly modify our understanding of salvation through Jesus Christ, this is something that's also beyond me. But you have Vatican observatory directors from Christopher Quayle, for instance, in his article, What If There Were Other Inhabited Worlds, concluding that Jesus simply might not remain the only word of salvation. That's his words. Quote, I would try to explore the alien by letting it be what it is without rushing for a classification category, not even presuming two genders, Quayle said. And then he drops this bombshell, quote, while Christ is the first and last word, the Alpha and Omega spoken to humanity, he is not necessarily the only word spoken to the universe. For the word spoken to us does not seem to exclude an equivalent word spoken to aliens. They too could have had their Logos event, whatever that event might have been. It does not have to be a repeated death and resurrection. If we allow God more imagination than some religious thinkers, i.e., by the way, let me insert here, Steve Quayle, Tom Horn, Chris Putnam, et al., some religious thinkers seem to have, for God as omnipotent is not restricted to one form of language, the human, end quote. So what we have are very high-ranking spokespersons for the Vatican who, in recent years, including 2011, and we'll see what they say in 2012, are offering language acknowledging, first of all, the likelihood of extraterrestrial intelligence, and secondly, a dramatic role that ET's introduction to human civilization is going to play in regard to altering established creeds about anthropology, philosophy, religion, redemption, but specifically a rereading of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And by the way, this could be consequential to the very near future. So is that kind of what you wanted me to say, Steve?
Absolutely. And Chris, I think this is critical too, because from your perspective of writing, co-authoring and doing all your investigation, I'd like you to address that too, if you wouldn't mind, in 5 minutes. It won't hurt us to take an extra 5 minutes. And again, you guys, I'm not trying to assign, but we've just been on almost for 3 hours, and where'd the time go?
That's what they all say about Omega Man Radio.
So, Steve, were you asking me about my opinion on the alien question?
I'm asking you about the change in the theology of basically the Catholic hierarchy and in relationship to the alien. Basically, what they're undermining, if the basic Bible is there's no name given under heaven at which a man can be saved. So I want your take on that, because again, you are a man who gets in and delves into things. And so, please address that issue.
Well, I'll tell you, what Tom just said is very disturbing. I mean, anybody that's talking about changing the gospel, I mean, that, the Apostle Paul said in Galatians, if I or an angel from heaven preach another gospel to you, let him be accursed. So, I mean, biblically, there's absolutely no way we should accept anything like what he was just talking about. I think it's really kind of strange the way the Vatican has been talking about, that's a subject that I follow and I'm interested in. It's also one that's really hard to parse, because there's so much bad information, and there's so many people that hoax UFO things and things like that it's really hard, to find out what's real. But I follow the subject very, very closely. One of the things that in the research for this book that that I was really shocked to discover was, how the Marian apparition kind of fits in to Catholic theology. And, that is one way that I can see some kind of intersection perhaps with UFOs. And it might be another thing that, you were mentioning earlier, you were talking about Islam, and, and we're also talking about this third temple thing. Now, one of the things that I think is a live possibility is, we're talking about, a religion of Antichrist in Jerusalem and a third temple, and somehow a one-world religion, is what's predicted. Now, what could possibly unite Judaism, Catholicism, and Islam under one temple? I mean, that seems literally impossible with the way things are today. But if you had something come in from outside, like an alien presence or something like that, that says, here we are, and preaches this peaceful new gospel that Tom was mentioning there. I could see how that might unite all the world religions under this new thing. That's a live possibility. It's going to take something that powerful. Now, the apparition is making these kind of statements, though. I mean, I did a whole chapter on the Marian apparition in the book, and in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, the apparition's appearing and calling itself Our Lady of the Nations, and it's talking about uniting the world. Okay, and we look at the prophecies in the book of Revelation, and we see that, Revelation 17 is talking about this one world religion all coming together. And, what could do that? It's interesting that the Muslims also venerate Mary. Okay, and, that seems to be an intersection between these two, classically opposing faiths that could actually bring them together. Now, I don't know how that's going to play out, but it could actually intersect with this thing that Tom's talking about, with the Vatican hinting at alien presences. Now, it's going to take something external and something really huge to get the world's attention to unite everybody under one leadership and one faith. And, I think that is something that we can't exclude, because it seems like, possibly that is the strong delusion that the Apostle Paul talked about in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2.
I
Could
agree
be.
with you on that. Absolutely. Hey, Chris, one thing you might factor in, too, I think is fascinating. Fatima, the visions of Fatima, which is obviously a city in Portugal, but what is Muhammad's daughter's name?
Yeah.
Right.
So I made this statement, you guys, and of course, obviously my fans didn't appreciate it 15 years ago, but I said I can literally see how that's going to merge together, because, look, you've got the whole concept. You've got the Islamic, and boy, I wish some of these generals in our Pentagon would get their acts together, because they don't understand the theology, the ideology of Ahmadinejad, when he believes that if it's not, his exact words were, if 50 million Iranians have to be martyred to bring on the Imam Mahdi, then so be it. Well, now you've got everybody working together, so I think it's fascinating, okay? Just that I don't believe there are any coincidences. And remember, you quoted Galatians a minute ago, and what's neat, Chris, about that, that's the only time I see Paul saying something twice. He says, let him be accursed. Again I say unto you. Remember that?
Yeah, he does.
That double, if you will, in the mouth, 2 or 3 witnesses, let every word be established. But that doesn't happen that much in either the Old or New Testament. And when it does, I mean, it's like God saying, listen, I have esteemed my word above my name, and he's putting his hallmark on it. So I just want to throw that in, because obviously, look, there are seducing spirits. There are people that literally believe, they sit down in a seance, call up the spirit of Uncle George. It's not Uncle George. The Bible teaches give a man once die and once a judgment, but it's a familiar spirit, a spirit that is familiar with them. So now, Tom, and I think that, boy, I wish we could do another show on Stargate, you guys, because here's the thing. You, Tom, made that statement, and the gates of hell will not prevail. Until you said that to me, it wasn't time for me to embrace that, and that was at that exact moment so many years ago, and now all we see is so many attempts to open the gates. By the way, there are 72 gates. There are 72 stargates. There are 72 goetic demon gates. There are 72 ionospheric heaters like HARP. We're seeing all the 72, and for the record, there are 72 fusion centers in the United States, okay? The combination of all the intelligence gathering and law enforcement, 72. That number is throughout. So I think, Chris, the point that you're bringing up is absolutely critical for the people listening tonight. And look, every time I do a talk radio program, and bless you both for coming on, and we'll take the questions or whatever in a few minutes, but I know this. I know, what can I say to the people? And this is how I get to the bottom line, you guys. It may sound not the right way to say it, but if I could say to the people of God, and I knew that today was my last night, what would I tell them? That's what I try and bring into a conversation like this. And, Tom, that's why I took you to the bottom line, okay? Sometimes as researchers, I mean,
Gentlemen, excuse me 1 second, please. Folks, we're going into the 4th hour. To hear it, you want to go right now to OmegaManRadio.com, where we're going to continue to stream. If you want to call in, you need to call on the switchboard now. That's 917-889-2745. Continue on, Steve.
Well, I think it's critical that if this is the last thing, we have to bring people to the lateness of the hour. I think we've lived in the indefinite prophetic long, and now we're in it's happening now. So, Tom, it's not, listen, if the guy croaks, forgive me, Ratzinger gets knocked off, murdered, assassinated, I mean, this thing can come so quick, and I think that we don't set time, but we can look at the events, and the fact that you guys wrote the book at this time, and all the headlines are basically, you were ahead of the headlines, that has to tell me that the time clock is punched, and we're on accelerated events being fulfilled right before our eyes. Hey, Bruce, let's take a break now, and then that'll be our last break before the end of the show.
Okay, gentlemen, we're going to take about a 5-minute break, and we're